I'm legally an introvert, though I trick a lot of people into thinking I'm an extrovert. For a long time, I struggled to let other people in. I played the part of the quiet, well behaved student, but you never know what was going on inside. I typically got through school attaching myself to one or two friends, but while I was super committed to those friendships, they hardly got deeper than just shared interests. It wasn't until college that I really began developing a community. And it really wasn't until adulthood that I learned to open up, grab myself a therapist, and started collecting mentors like Thanos collected Infinity Stones. Only now do I realize just how much beauty is found in community when we decide to not isolate ourselves and to let people in, no matter how hard that sometimes is. Well, Nic Flores is on the podcast today to lead us through a discussion about isolation and its opposite, community. Nic has formerly been in ministry, and these days he hosts the newly rebranded podcast called the Clean Plate Club. And I think it's going to be a great conversation all about, like I said, isolation, community, and we'll dive in and get deep and talk about some really interesting things. Our culture runs on values contrary to Christ. We're surrounded by a million voices competing for our attention. Even in our own churches, sometimes our eyes aren't firmly on Jesus. So one question remains: who or what do you truly worship? Welcome to the Smashing Idols podcast. I'm Jake Doberenz, and this is your call to break free from the things that pull you away from Jesus Christ. Each week I chat with theologians, ministers, cultural thinkers, and everyday believers to uncover how modern idols sneak into our lives and how we can smash them to pieces. We're not here for surface-level faith. We're here to dig deep, challenge the norms, rediscover what it means to follow Jesus with everything we've got. So if you're ready to kick distractions to the curb and embrace a faith worth living, you've come to the right place. And hey, don't forget to check out jakedoberenz.com/podcast to catch every episode and subscribe to the newsletter. So, you ready? Let's start smashing those idols. Nic, thank you so much for jumping from Threads to podcast in terms of connection.
Totally putting yourself out there for sure on Threads, and as we are finding out now, Threads is a great place to do that. But this isn't a plug for Threads by any means.
Nope, they do not pay me. That's for sure.
No, not a sponsor.
No, it is good. I do sometimes wonder though how long that's going to last, because this is the gameplay, right? It's all democratic and beautiful, and then suddenly they're like, we need advertisers, and then it gets ugly. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe I should be more optimistic, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's good. It's good to be here. I think that's awesome. Your story seems to kind of parallel mine as like, I grabbed myself a therapist and you started. I love the parallel there, connecting to Infinity Stones as well. Hopefully you have a little bit more than, 5 or 6 Infinity Stones?
Right, exactly. And I was even reflecting as I said that line that I wrote earlier. I was even thinking, oh, that's kind of a negative thing, actually, that he got all those. But, the point is, it's powerful to have these mentors. That's what, and that I like to collect them. That was the point there. But, yeah, fair enough. I do love to connect with people and to get people's wisdom. It's really cool. Yeah. Highly recommend. For sure. Well, you mentioned that story parallels, so let's kind of get into your story. So, if we time travel back to like 2015-ish, I believe you said, you were serving in ministry, and because of what you did, several people walked away. Then about a year later, something similar happened, but you were the one that kind of walked away before anyone else. You left church, you sat in isolation. So, as much details as you want to give us, just talk to us
Yeah.
about those experiences where you felt most alone, and then how you began to heal.
Yeah, and before I can even get to feeling alone, like you said, we have to time travel a little bit, and so basically, I grew up going to church, like a lot of people have, and for me, church was the safest place I felt. I was uh, had friends, a lot of friends at church, compared to at school. I didn't have a lot of friends at my public school, but I had a lot of friends at my church. And I think maybe that just chops up to, hey, my parents loved going to church as well. And we had just family friends and we would hang out with families from church, not necessarily from my school. So I had a lot of friends at church. I felt safe. I felt comfortable. By the time I got into middle school, so junior high ministry era, where now it's not just Sunday, but there's a Wednesday and maybe a occasional Friday evening at someone's house, youth group, and now it's more so a social game per se of being at church. It's not just going in on Sunday, your parents check you in and then they check you out and then you go home. But it was really very social for me. And so I started to play the game of how can I, instead of collecting therapists and mentors, how can I collect friends and kind of climb this social ladder per se? How can I be more popular? How can I be more funny? Um, and I think at that moment, in terms of faith, Jesus and God were kind of just cool to have. Like I just put him on the resume of, yeah, I believe in Jesus. Yeah, I believe in God, and I worship and I do all this stuff. But for me, at the root of it, it was more so church was about those friends and that social status. And for me, I was just looking for any, like I said, I was looking for any way I possibly could move up. And so that transformed into uh, getting into graphic design and being the kid at home on Microsoft Paint, just creating the flyers for youth group. We had a calendar every month saying the events. I don't know if your youth group did, but we had calendars that we'd print out. And so I inserted myself super quickly to volunteer. Hey, like I'll do that. I'll make those calendars. That sounds cool. So I would volunteer in that way, and that just evolved over time. And that was kind of my in to church because I just felt like it was different enough because I couldn't play guitar, I couldn't lead worship. I couldn't carry that many chairs on my arm after service back. And so that was my end. And that's just how I gained, or in my mind, gained more acceptance, gained more value in terms of faith, because I was like, oh, my pastors are um, congratulating me on all this stuff. People in the church recognize, hey, that's the kid that made the flyer. But then as time went on into high school, it became a little bit more serious into design and volunteering, doing websites now, not just flyers, getting into sound ministry, doing the sound, setting up the stage. So anything kind of creative and production wise was where you can find me at church, and then eventually leading any type of like Bible study group for the guys in the group, or planning events to Six Flags. Like that was me. I was just trying to do everything I possibly could, looking for any infinity stone to grab, whether it was gonna create a long lasting satisfaction or long lasting type of value. So for me, it's just like maybe in Mario Kart where you hit the speed boost, right? You hit the speed boost and you're going fast for a couple seconds. So I was just looking for every speed boost to keep going, to keep being accepted, to keep my friends, to keep my worth, keep my value. Um, and in the moment, it just didn't. I didn't see that. I didn't see why I was doing this, why I was doing all these things. It was just I'm chasing that high, that Mario Kart speed boost, right? But yeah, we fast forward to 2015. By this point, I've been out of high school for 3 years. After high school, I jumped straight into youth ministry and serving along high schoolers and um, junior hires as well, and being a small group leader, doing doing the most, and then also pairing that with the now young adults ministry and doing all the creative there. So I was just always in church, and that's where I found my value. So much so where it intervened with my school. So I dropped out of college. I was just like, I'm just going to do ministry. This is where I wanted. This is what I want to do. I feel called to do this, but it's again chasing that high of just church. And then yeah, we come up to this incident in 2015. I had just ended a summer working at a summer camp in Southern California, a pretty well known one, and summer ended early because there were flash floods. It destroyed all of camp, flooded everything building, so we had to end like a month early. So we still had like 3 or 4 more weeks of camp to go. And I just full went into like a panic. At this point, I had um, kind of wagered everything. I left home because my parents wanted me to join the military because I dropped out of school, and I was just going to do ministry. And so working at this summer camp was a way to be like, no, like God wants me to be in ministry and this is an open door. I'm not going to join the military, but that just wasn't going to work out there. And so yeah, I'm at the end of the summer camp. And I'm like, I don't know where to go. That like I was banking on everything for this camp to work out. And then just kind of out of desperation, I ended up stealing some money from a family that I was working with. And I didn't know why. I don't, people asked me later, like, "Hey, why'd you steal? Why'd you do that? Like, you're doing all this ministry, like, so unexpected of you to do this." And they just kind of, in my mind, they walked away from me. They kind of abandoned me, and I felt alone. And that was just a really pivotal moment. And then again, I just don't know why this was happening. Why was I doing this? Come a couple years later, the family kind of just forgives me. The friends that I had from that camp just kind of stayed distant, but I just went back to my home church, carried on life as usual. And then, like a year later, I end up stealing again, but from somebody else. And it's just like, whoa, kind of flashback. It's like, I remember what happened last time I stole something. These people walked away. And so, in that same kind of shame and trying to protect myself again, because again, I don't know why at this moment. Why am I stealing? I was like covered in shame and was like, I can't have people at church know about this because I did it again. I don't know if these people back home are going to forgive me. I don't know if they're going to accept me. I don't know if the love will hold up because, again, like I said, I had this long history of serving, and doing everything I can to gain that love, and none of it ever felt authentic enough. That's why I kept chasing that high. And so yeah, I ultimately just was like, I'm done. Like I'm gonna crawl into my turtle shell and hide and just wallow in this shame is kind of where I was. And it's like I'm ultimately done with church because obviously I'm not good enough for it, and I don't know why. Like I'm broken.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That's quite the journey for sure. And we're talking today about why we isolate, why we might push people
Yeah,
away, why we might find ourselves just kind of alone. So,
yeah,
I mean, besides your own experience, like, why do we want to do that? Why do you push people away? Why
yeah,
do we not want to open up and connect with people in these tough times in our lives?
yeah. I approach this question with um, just trying to understand that people's stories have a lot of nuance. There's a lot going on underneath that maybe if you're the one isolating, you don't even know why you're doing it. I definitely didn't know why I was doing it in the moment. I didn't know why I stole those things. I don't I don't know why I was seeking out all this attention at church. And so when it comes to isolation, I think it's very much the same. And so when we look at people in our lives, like our neighbors or just people we grew up with, and we're like, hey, where did so and so go? Like, why did they isolate themselves? I think we have to approach it with um, grace and empathy, and just ultimately like caring to cultivate a safe space for that person to come back. Like I related it to crawling into my turtle shell. Like I'm just gonna like hide, right? Um, and nowhere to me felt safe or welcoming to crawl out. It just felt like everybody around me was going to yell at me, question me, maybe shame me even more than what I'm already doing to myself. Like I'm beating myself up about the mistakes I made. And it's just feeling powerless ultimately. I feel like when we isolate ourselves, we feel like we don't have the power to speak up. We don't feel worthy enough to have our voice heard. And so it's like, I'm not going to ask for help if you're just going to shame me. And so it's these misconceptions and these lies we tell ourselves, towards, like you said earlier, like you had to jump out and find a therapist to like help you. And that's ultimately what happened to me. I just, through circumstances, I just ended up with a life coach that kind of walked me through um, some curriculum and helped me get out of this hole. But it's super hard to open up with that.
Yeah, yeah, there are a lot of reasons there, right? As you mentioned, the
Yeah,
nuance.
for sure.
For sure, that's a common. I mean, there are all sorts of reasons there. So, like, what do we miss out on when we isolate? Like, why is this bad? I guess why do we need each other? Would you say? What would your response be to that?
Yeah, I think from in my story, I missed out on a lot of opportunity for growth. I missed out on a lot of opportunity um, for just to continue friendships. I know I pushed a lot of people away. I pushed, like as I mentioned earlier, I stepped away from my home when I went to go pursue ministry before anything ever blew up in my life. And in that season, there were a lot of people within my church community that helped me along the way. They let me sleep on their couch for a night or two. Maybe they bought me dinner or they bought me a phone, you know. And so there were a lot of positives there prior. And I think even me knowing, hey, all these people helped me out before, and I am going to isolate, I missed out on the opportunity to, I don't know. I think I just thought I already cashed this check once. Um, is it gonna cash again or is it gonna bounce? You know, and I just wasn't willing to step out in that in faith, really, in the good faith of people, in the good faith of God, who, in my mind, did provide for me when I left home before camping. Like I left home in Campton, start for like another month. And so I had to live a month before I could move to the campgrounds. I had to live for like basically a month, couch surfing with people, living by the good graces of people. God definitely provided in those times. There's definitely no doubt about it. But in my isolation and in my shame, it just felt like I put this wall up to see the possibilities of, yeah, I think that's basically the answer. It's like you miss out on like what God could ultimately do and provide for you when you isolate.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that specifically because we see this call echoed in Scripture a lot to gather, to love one another, to be a community, and that's because like all of us are limited. We are limited
For sure.
people. We need other people to help us out, to provide us with things. And God works so often through other people, especially when we just cannot do things on our own. Whether that's we need to couch surf for a while or whatever it is, God works
Yeah.
through people for sure.
Yeah. I think about the story often of like the guy that's on the stranded island in the middle of nowhere and he's got nothing. And then like a cruise ship comes up, and he's like, "Oh no, God's gonna save me. God's gonna come rescue me." And then the cruise ship leaves, because and then the guy's like, "I'm just gonna stay on this island because God's gonna protect me. God's gonna provide." But really, it's like, yo, God sent that cruise ship to rescue you, but in your isolation, you were blinded to see God was right there the whole time.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I tell similar stories of that joke, that parable, whatever you want to call it, a
Yeah,
lot for sure. But that's especially fitting, you know. We have the saying "No man is an island," which yeah, we're not supposed to be for sure.
yeah,
So, you know, I we're talking a lot about like us as individuals, why we might
yeah,
isolate, why we might push people away. But I don't want to lay all the blame sometimes at the feet of
mm,
individuals, because
yeah,
sometimes other people make choices to push us.
mhm,
And sometimes Christian communities can do things, right, that force us away from that communities. Um, there can be a variety of ways they can do that. So, like, maybe this is where you can kind of finish the story of how you got back into church. Like, what
yeah,
is a, or you just what drew you back to faith? What does a good Christian community look like? What can these communities strive to so that they can, you know, not have people isolate themselves, or not intentionally or unintentionally push people away?
yeah. I'll first kind of clarify here in the story, not necessarily on your doing, but maybe a listener is like, wait, what? Um, I would say the church I left out of shame wasn't necessarily a bad church. I don't I don't put any blame on the community for why I left. I think I did that all on my own, and just like my psyche or something inside me, um, at the moment was like, I need to walk away, and maybe I felt pushed away. I think I just put my perception of people on them. I didn't even give them a chance to welcome me back. Um, I would say that was just out of reaction to what happened to me the first time out when I was working at that summer camp, and those people I worked alongside of in ministry left me. I don't think they necessarily pushed me away. I think they were just hurt, and rightfully so by my actions. Maybe they didn't trust me anymore. But I totally see this question play out in the conversations I have with people all the time. Is a church is pushing you away, or it just feels like, I know for me it isn't in my own experience. 'Cause I think that's the only thing I can really speak to with authority. Is there are churches that put up these personas, I guess per se, that could be turnoffs, I guess. And one big one that's on everybody's mind these days is maybe like Christian nationalism per se would be a turnoff for me personally, where I don't necessarily want to walk into a church where majority of the community is wearing red hats. That's for me personally, I don't want that. And and then all the stigma wrapped around Christian nationalism and red hats and whatever is, it's both directly and indirectly pushing people away. It's saying, because we already know what you stand for. I feel like, especially around the LGBTQ community, if you don't, a lot of people in that community do not feel comfortable or safe around somebody wearing a red hat that said MAGA on it, or a church that is pro, the guy sitting in the White House right now. And so for me, I think that directly and indirectly pushes people away. And that is just the reality that we live in. And so, but what kind of got me back into church is now I have set up um, these kind of guidelines for myself. I've evaluated what's important to me, in community. And for me, and what's important in community is being welcoming, being open to questions about faith, and being open to doubt, being open to deconstruction, being open to welcoming people of all walks of life, whether they are gay, lesbian, trans, male, female, white, black, Hispanic, Southeast Asian, right? Whatever it is, to truly be welcoming and not just on a web page for SEO hits of, yeah, we're a welcoming church, but really when you step in, you're like, I don't know. And for me, as a graphic designer and someone who does that professionally in marketing, I just am so like on this hill that I'm willing to die on, is that SEO and marketing and social media kind of has ruined churches because it's all about hitting those keywords. And so whatever ranks you higher. So everybody has a different idea of what welcoming is. So if you are a more conservative Christian, you're looking for a welcoming church that looks different than someone who identifies as a lesbian looking for a welcoming church. That's a totally different perception. So when we go online, it's like, oh, they say they're welcoming, but then you walk in the door and you're like, this is different. This is not what I had in mind. Um, and so it when you are looking for a welcoming church or you're looking for a welcoming community, it will take time to find what you're looking for. I would imagine you, Jake, might have tried a couple different people to be your mentor, or a couple different therapists, maybe. I know for me, that was the case for me, is I tried a couple different people to be my therapist. I tried a couple different people to be a mentor that I would meet once a week. And it's trying to find, for me, when I'm looking for a therapist or I'm looking for a mentor, it's trying to find balance between I'm not going to be just getting a bunch of confirmation bias of, hey, this person's going to agree with everything I say. So that's great. You're just going to end up in an echo chamber and not really grow. So I'm looking for the balance of, yeah, you're going to not necessarily side with me, but you're going to be empathetic towards my views and can see where I'm coming from. But at the same time, you're also going to challenge them to be like, well, why? How did you come to that conclusion? Why do you believe that? Why did you do this? Or why are you going to do that? Um, and so when I look for a church community, it's going to take a couple of tries. We have Me and my wife have tried a couple of churches in our area. When we live in Oklahoma, we tried a couple of churches. We even walked out of a church service before in the middle of service, which was super intimidating. But I think it's finding where, just creating your own checklist. Where are your values? What do you value, um, to make your faith really your own and not necessarily be told what to believe and how to believe it? Because I think there can be a lot of pitfalls, and is it really authentic? And yada yada.
Thank you for that, and then thank you for kind of finishing the story, so to speak, about how you got back and the different churches you're trying and the values that you now know you have. What I kind of
Yeah,
heard you saying, you talked about just kind of the lines that a lot of churches draw that pushes people away. Whatever political or theological topic, those lines push people away. Um,
for sure.
and then you're right about, and I was thinking the same thing too. Every church says we're the most welcoming church in town or whatever,
Yeah.
you know. And you're right,
Yep.
the websites look great, and they have one person of color in their church. Well, he's on the website or whatever. It's like there's
Yep.
all kinds of ugh, not great things
Yep.
that we do that aren't. And you didn't necessarily use this word, but it seems like what we're looking for is authentic welcoming, like the
For
real
sure.
deal, not just for SEO, actual factual welcoming. And um absolutely, that means you got to try some different churches, you got to experiment and things like that. um you're probably going to have to go more than once in a couple different places too to kind
Definitely.
of see what
Yeah.
connects. And so
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for all that kind of exploration. We are getting near the wrap up, I should say. But I'm wondering if maybe again we can time travel. So we have the
Yeah.
time stone and our affinity gauntlet. If you could talk to your younger self, and just your younger self as just a stand-in for anybody that might be having
Yeah.
those kind of issues. Um, but as you yourself said earlier, you can really only speak from your own experience. So
Yeah.
I mean, what advice would you give that younger self, or to anybody who is struggling with self isolation, with trusting others, and they might not want to partake in all the benefits of community? What would you tell them?
Yeah. It's good. That's a good question. I look back on my own story and I look at me at home, not wanting to go hang out with my friends, not wanting to go to church, not wanting to join really any community unless I felt safe in. And I would say just do that. Just wait till you are safe. And what is really helpful, I think, going back to the last question, is really understanding what do you value, and align yourself in a way where you are finding people that have similar values. I think that's a great place to start to feel safe in. It's like, hey, these people might have similar experiences as me. Or maybe they're not similar, but they are able to see and empathize with my story. Um, and earlier I alluded to just me always needing to be at church to serve and to hit those Mario Kart speed boosts to hit this high of acceptance. And when I eventually made my way to like therapy and I got married and my wife was a really safe space for me, when I felt safe enough to open up, I realized, hey, I know why I was doing all that. And I was being sexually abused at home when I was a kid, by a family member of mine. And so that caused me to want to not be home. And so that's why I was at every service on Sunday. I was at every service on Wednesday. I was at every service on Friday. Like, and I was everywhere in between at people's houses and whatever, just trying to do whatever I could to not be there. And I only felt accepted by doing things. And that's what caused me to, um, one, seek all that acceptance. And then when summer camp ended and I ended up stealing, it was because I felt powerless. I felt abandoned. I started, as I got into therapy and got into mentorships and stuff like that, I was starting to find words to attach to feelings so I then could create visually like what does my cycle look like. And so the program I went through was called Men's Skills, and that's kind of a plug, but it's a it was a program that helped me identify a pain cycle, like what am I doing when I feel pain, and then create a peace cycle. Like, how do I exit this pain cycle of like all this destructive behavior and then shift it to the peace cycle of like positive behavior. So for instance, it was attaching those words of when I feel abandoned. So when those people left me after camp, what did I do? I stole. Why? Because I was powerless. And it's it's then tracing back to, as kind of with any kind of therapy session, you kind of go back to your family of origin, you go to your story, like your childhood, and you're just relating those cycles. And then you can, once you identify them, you can break free and be like, well, I'm not actually abandoned. Like those people failed me, but the good news is Jesus is with us all the time. And then you look to scripture and you back that up. It's like, oh, God is here. Like Jesus is here. He'll never leave you nor forsake you. And then so in that now rewiring of my brain, I can then engage in community. So it's looking and leaning on something outside of ourselves and outside of, our immediate circle. Cause yeah, I can be like, yes, my wife loves me. My wife is here all the time, but she's only human, and sometimes she's gonna fail at that. Like, but I know Jesus will not, and so that's what I kind of lean on is, and that's what I would tell people is start to look at words, and identify these feelings and kind of create your own pain and peace cycle. It's pretty easy of a concept once you understand. It's like, oh, I'm doing all these negative things. How do I get out of here? What is the opposite? It's like you're doing here, smashing idols, right? We're talking about the idol of isolation. It feels so comfortable to be here in isolation on this island, waiting for God to save me. But the opposite is, you know, Jesus is here. He sent a cruise ship. um, and now I don't have to be in isolation. So it's really trying to what's the scripture? Not relying on your own understanding is kind of what it is. It's breaking, rewiring your brain through all these traumas, whether big traumas or little traumas. For me, my trauma was huge, sexual abuse. But as outside of that, there was also all these other small traumas, little t traumas that happened along the way, partially to my own doing. But just trying to rewire and trying to create that new cycle of I can engage in community. I can, once you have words, it's a lot easier. So definitely take time to self reflect. Definitely take time to find those words. I'm always a big fan of therapy. My last therapist said her job is because when I walk in the room, I bring all these like shrapnel pieces and they're floating around the room, uh, and her job is to put them back together as someone on the outside so I can see the picture, so I can see why I did what I did and why I can rewrite that pattern in my brain to engage in community.
Well, Nic Flores, thank you so much for telling your story today. Honestly, we got the full arc kind of throughout everything, and I really appreciate that. Um, some people might be more interested to kind of learn what you have to say, especially now that you have these, a stamp of approval of Smashing Idols. It means that's a big deal for like two people
Thank
probably.
you.
But
Oh,
yeah, where can people
oh
find
yes.
you on the internet and check out your podcast, of course, and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, man. Even if it's two people, um, I even look at my own download numbers and like, oh man, some don't look at your download numbers.
Yeah, don't do that. No.
Um, but I will say this: I was at a friend's wedding last year, and someone came up to me, and we've known each other for a long time. But they're like, "Hey, I really appreciate your podcast," and um, that was just solidifying to me of like, okay, as long as it takes like one person. I mean, you're saying
Amen.
two people, so that's huge.
Well,
But
at least two.
yeah, even if it's one person and you change one person's life, that's all that matters. I mean, even if not, I think it's just a great hobby and personal growth exercise to explore things. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram at nicflores.pod. So that's NICFLORES .pod. And that just that kind of houses my podcast, The Clean Plate Club, and another podcast I have actually with my wife called Estranged Millennials. That is, it's a Clean Plate Club, really wrestles around the idea of faith and deconstruction and doubt. So, and just kind of how do we end up with our own clean plate to enjoy a faith to find a faith that we enjoy, and breaking down stigma and questions of doubt and deconstruction. And Estranged Millennials is a podcast about estrangement. Both my
Mm-hmm.
wife and I are estranged from our parents from a lot of different traumas. We were from, I feel like both of our stories kind of cover the wide gamut of different types of traumas you can have from your family and breaking cycles and starting new healthy ones. And about mental health. And if you're a millennial, we talk about millennial things. If you're not, you're totally welcome either way. But yeah, those are the big projects that we have in the pipeline that we're working on. And yeah, I'd love to just have anybody who's willing to be a part of the conversation is totally welcome.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm legally a Gen Z, I have to say. I barely got in there. Sometimes I self-identify as a Zillennial, but
All
most
right.
days people are saying, "Oh, technically I'm Gen Z," but whatever, whatever. We got one
There's a
last
gray area.
question. What was that?
Oh, I said there's a little gray area in between generations. It's okay. It's no hard
Absolutely.
line. Go with your
I
heart.
didn't eat like Tide Pods or whatever, so it's like I'm not like that. I don't know. Anyway, I digress. So I want you to leave us with some wisdom here today. You've given us a lot of good stuff to think about and chew on for sure. Well, here's the last snippet, the last I was gonna say punch, but that sounds mean. Here's your handful of goodness for us here. So I'm gonna read the question, and then we'll end here. As we close, leave the audience with just one practical action they can do this week to live out their faith fully for Jesus.
Oh, there's a lot. There's definitely a lot, but I have to pick one. I'll say, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of nuance within stories for sure. There's not any kind of black and white reason why we do things or other people do things or believe what they believe. And I think to fully be like Jesus this week would be just be empathetic. Put yourself in other people's shoes and listen to their story. Um, Listen for why they hurt. Listen for why they maybe do things you don't agree with, or listen for why they're happy. Listen for why they're doing amazing work in their life, and yeah, just be because I think we see Jesus time and time again throughout the Gospels, sitting with people and listening to them and understanding their stories. Obviously, Jesus is God, so he knows everything, but um, he didn't walk around like that. Like, I already know why you're hurting. I already know why you did. He let people come to him, or he would even go to people that were hurting and listen. People, maybe the religious leaders in the time didn't even want to share a table with, share the same airspace, right? Especially the lepers and the thieves and the poor or the adulterers. Jesus sat with everybody and he was empathetic with them and he always um, loved them wherever they were. And so I think that's one thing we can do um, fully to be like Jesus, especially as we talk about isolation. Is a lot of people feel isolated just because they don't feel heard, just because they don't have that safe space, and so um, do that.
Thank you so much, Nick, for everything you've delivered to us today, everything you've talked to us about and explored with us. Really appreciate it. I end the show with a sharing challenge, just an encouragement to share this episode with somebody. And you should rate and review and all that fun podcast stuff. But my sharing challenge today, because we're talking about isolation community, is actually to listen to this podcast with somebody else. Listen to this podcast with somebody else. That could be a spouse, that could be a friend, a neighbor. If you're really pressed, maybe your cat, but let's try for a human. But that's your challenge today. I know it won't give me another download, but still, listen to this together and then talk about your stories and where you struggle with isolation community. And you know what? Also, our previous episode with John Adams talking about how feelings are good but can be dangerous actually pairs with this one nicely. So you can listen to that one too, and it's great.
There you go.
And great time for all. But anyway, that's the business side of things. Nic Flores, it was awesome, and really appreciate you being on and having this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Jake. It was super fun. I loved it.
Well, podcasting you know, everything's that's just we're living the dream. So it's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening today to Smashing Idols. To learn more about the show and me, Jake Doberenz, head over to jakedoberenz.com and be sure to check us out on Substack. That's jakedoberenz.substack.com. There you can subscribe to this podcast, which comes out every Tuesday morning, and you can subscribe to the newsletter, also called Smashing Idols, which comes out on Friday morning, where I dive into these subjects in a short essay. You can follow me on Twitter and Threads and Instagram and all the places at Jake Doberenz. I'd love to continue the conversation there. Alright everybody, grab those hammers, get to smashing those idols.